The car came through the gates at 8 in the morning. No announcement, no explanation, just a black car moving slowly through a military camp where nobody had been expecting a black car. The soldiers who saw it stopped and stared. Word moved through the camp the way word moves in places where people are waiting for something, fast and with the particular quality of something that doesn't quite make sense yet. And then the door opened. One soldier dropped his canteen. Another stopped mid-sentence, mouth open, words gone. Someone in the back row grabbed the arm of the man next to him, not pointing, just holding on the way you hold on to something when you can't quite trust what your eyes are telling you. A few men looked at each other, the same question on every face. Is that really? It was. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. 100 soldiers standing in the morning light, looking at one man. And that man looked back at them, at their young faces, at their tired eyes, at everything they were carrying that nobody had asked them to put down. And he nodded, once, slowly, as if to say, I know, I'm here.
A military camp 4 days before deployment is a specific kind of place. It is loud and purposeful and relentlessly forward-moving. There are things to do, equipment to check, orders to follow, forms to sign. Nobody has time to stop. Nobody is supposed to stop. The machinery of it all keeps moving because the machinery is designed to keep moving, to keep everyone busy enough that the fear stays in the background where it belongs. Fear was everywhere in that camp. Not spoken, you didn't speak it, not there, not to each other, not in a place where the only currency that mattered was the appearance of readiness, but it was there in every face and every silence and every letter home that tried to say everything without saying the one true thing. It was there in the way men cleaned equipment that was already clean and checked maps they had already memorized and found small tasks to occupy hands that needed to be occupied. James Carter was 19 years old. He had grown up in a small town in Georgia, the second of 4 children, a boy who had spent his childhood listening to Sam Cooke on a transistor radio in his bedroom, the one his mother had given him for his 14th birthday, the one he had carried everywhere until it finally gave out 2 years later. He had been drafted 8 weeks earlier. He was shipping out in 4 days. James was not the kind of person who talked about what he was feeling. He had been raised in the particular way that boys of his generation and his background were raised, to be useful, to be steady, to keep moving. Feelings were private things. You managed them alone, and you didn't burden others with them, and you certainly didn't say them out loud in the middle of a military camp where 100 other men were managing their own. But on a Tuesday evening, sitting on the edge of his bunk while the camp moved and shouted around him, James said something that he thought nobody heard. He wasn't making a request. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just saying out loud the one thing that was sitting at the center of everything he was feeling, the one wish that had nothing to do with survival or tactics or any of the practical things that filled every waking hour of life in that camp. I wish I could hear Sam Cooke sing, just once, before I go. The soldier on the next bunk heard it. He didn't say anything, but he remembered it.
The way a thing travels in a military camp is different from the way it travels anywhere else. In ordinary life, words spread horizontally, from person to person, friend to friend, across the flat landscape of daily connection. In a military camp, words move vertically as well. They move up. They find their way into conversations between ranks, into the ears of people with authority, into rooms where decisions get made. James's words moved upward. The soldier who had heard them mentioned it, not as a formal request, not as anything official, just in conversation, the way you mention something that has stayed with you. A corporal heard it and mentioned it to a sergeant, who mentioned it to a lieutenant, not because anyone thought anything would come of it, but because the image of a 19-year-old boy on the edge of his bunk saying that one quiet wish had a quality that made people want to pass it along. It carried something, the particular weight of a true thing said without any intention of being heard. The lieutenant wrote a letter. He didn't expect a response. He addressed it to Sam Cooke's record label in Los Angeles, and he described in plain language what he had heard. He described James. He described the camp. He described the 4 days remaining before deployment and the particular quality of the silence that had followed those few words on a Tuesday evening. He sent it, and he forgot about it. There were other things to do. 3 weeks later, a black car came through the gates. Nobody had told James. Nobody had told anyone, really. The lieutenant had received a single brief telephone call 2 days earlier, a voice on the other end confirming that someone would be coming, and he had kept it to himself because he wasn't entirely sure he believed it, and he didn't want to raise expectations that might not be met. He had simply made sure the yard would be clear that Tuesday morning. That was all. So when the car came through the gates, nobody was prepared. The camp was in the middle of its ordinary morning, drills running, equipment being checked, the relentless machinery of preparation in full motion. And then the car appeared. And then it stopped. And then the door opened. Sam Cooke stepped out into the morning light of that military camp wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, as if he had come from a meeting or a recording session or any of the 100 other things that filled his days. He stood for a moment and looked at the yard, at the soldiers who had stopped what they were doing, at the faces turning toward him one by one as word rippled outward from the gate, at the particular quality of the silence that was settling over the place. He had read the lieutenant's letter 3 times. He had read it the first time quickly, the way he read most things that came through his office. Then he had set it down and picked it up again and read it more slowly. Then he had sat for a long time with it in his hands, thinking about a 19-year-old boy on the edge of a bunk in Georgia, saying out loud the one wish that might make the fear bearable. He had thought about Eleanor's letter. He had thought about Malcolm's 4 words. He had thought about all the times someone had told him what his voice meant to them, and he had received it graciously and moved on. And he had thought about how easy it was in the business of an enormous life to receive those things and keep moving, to acknowledge them and file them away and let the next thing come. He had thought about James, about the specific, particular, irreplaceable fact of James Carter, 19 years old, 4 days from shipping out, asking for nothing except to hear a song one more time before everything changed. Not asking, even, just saying, into the air, to nobody. He had stood up from his desk. He had told his assistant to clear his schedule. He had booked a flight to Georgia. Now he stood in the yard and looked at the men looking at him, and he felt the weight of what this place was, what these men were carrying, what they were about to walk into, what it meant to be 19 years old and shipping out in 4 days. He had grown up in Clarksdale, Mississippi. He understood something about being asked to be braver than circumstances warranted, about being expected to move forward when every instinct said otherwise. Someone in the crowd said his name, just his name, Sam, quietly, almost to themselves, the way you say something you can't quite believe is real. Sam looked in the direction of the voice. He scanned the faces until he found the one he was looking for. The lieutenant had described James, and the description had been accurate. 19 years old, 2nd row. The particular expression of someone who has not yet understood what is happening. Sam walked toward him. The crowd parted without being asked. He stopped in front of James, and he looked at him for a moment. This boy, this 19-year-old boy in his uniform, 4 days from shipping out, and he said, "I heard you had a request." James couldn't speak. He opened his mouth and closed it again. His eyes had gone bright in the way that eyes go bright when something is happening that is too large to process in real time. Sam smiled. He turned to the yard, to the 100 men standing in the morning light, and he said, "I hope nobody minds if I sing a little this morning." Nobody minded.
What happened in that military camp on that Tuesday morning in 1964 was not a concert. There was no stage, no microphone, no band, no lights. There was a yard full of soldiers and one man in a dark suit standing among them. And the man began to sing. He sang without accompaniment, just his voice in the open air of a military camp in Georgia, carrying across the yard with the particular quality that Sam Cooke's voice always carried. That warmth, that control, that sense of something being communicated that went deeper than the words themselves. He sang "You Send Me" first, the song that had made him famous, the song that had crossed every boundary the music industry said couldn't be crossed, that had reached into living rooms and kitchens and cars and barracks and found people wherever they were. In that yard, on that morning, it sounded different from the record. Smaller, in one sense, no orchestra, no production, no studio perfection, but larger in another sense entirely. The kind of larger that happens when a voice has nothing to hide behind and chooses to hide behind nothing. He sang "Bring It On Home to Me." The men who had been standing stiffly, the way soldiers stand when they are not sure what posture the situation requires, began to relax. Not all at once, gradually, the way ice thaws from the edges inward. Shoulders dropped, feet shifted. The performance of readiness gave way slightly to something more human. He sang quietly and without announcement the opening bars of "A Change Is Gonna Come," and something happened in the yard that nobody quite had words for afterward, a quality of attention that was different from any other kind of attention. The kind that happens when music reaches the place where the fear lives and acknowledges it without trying to fix it or replace it, simply sitting beside it for a moment and saying, "I know this is here. I see it. You don't have to pretend otherwise." The men listened the way people listen when they are not thinking about listening, completely, without effort, the way you breathe. Some of them closed their eyes. Some of them looked at the ground. Some of them looked at each other with the particular expression of people sharing something they will not speak about afterward, but will carry with them for the rest of their lives. James stood in the second row and listened. The fear was still there. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't dissolve or transform or become something manageable, but it moved slightly to the background. For the duration of those songs in that yard on that Tuesday morning 4 days before everything changed, the fear was not the loudest thing in James Carter's chest. When Sam finished, the yard was quiet for a long moment. Then the applause came, not the explosive applause of a concert crowd, but something more considered, more personal, the applause of men who have been given something they needed without knowing they needed it. Sam found James afterward. They stood together for a few minutes at the edge of the yard, slightly apart from the others. Nobody reported what was said. That conversation belonged to the two of them, to the man who had come all this way and the boy who had said a quiet wish out loud on a Tuesday evening without expecting anyone to hear it. When Sam left, James watched the black car move back through the gates and disappear down the road. He stood there for a moment after it was gone. Then he turned back to the camp, to the equipment and the drills and the 4 remaining days and everything that waited beyond them. He was still afraid, but he had heard Sam Cooke sing, just once, before he went. Sam Cooke died 6 weeks later. He was 33 years old. He never knew what happened to James Carter. He never knew if James came home. He never knew if the boy had carried that Tuesday morning with him into whatever came next, into the jungle, into the fear, into the days that followed the days that followed. He had simply read a letter, booked a flight, and shown up, because that was what the situation required, because some things cannot wait, because a 19-year-old boy had said a quiet wish out loud, and someone had heard it, and that someone had decided, without hesitation, without calculation, without asking what was in it for him, that the wish was worth honoring. That is who Sam Cooke was, not just the voice on the record, the man who showed up, the man who understood that fame was not an end in itself, but a means, a way of reaching people, of being present for people, of standing in the yards of military camps in Georgia when a boy needed to hear a song before the world changed. Some gifts you give on a stage, some gifts you give in a yard. Both of them matter, both of them last, and the ones given in the yard, the ones nobody planned, nobody announced, nobody sold tickets to, those are sometimes the ones that last the longest, that travel the furthest, that find their way into the places where the fear lives and sit beside it for a while, quietly, without asking anything in return. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe. Every day we tell the stories behind the music, the moments that never made the headlines but changed everything for the people they reached. Hit the like button if you believe that showing up is sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do. And tell us in the comments, do you think James came home? Because we never found out. And somehow that feels right. Some stories end where they need to end. We'll see you in the next one.